The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Hey everyone, this is your lore master, Jonathan. Join me as I guide the novices Amena and Pimer, the Child of the Light Lance, and the Ogier Quirkus through the dangers and intrigues of the next turning of the Wheel of Time. We are the Just Roll With It podcast. You can find our episodes at www.justroll.net or as Just Roll With It podcast on any of your favorite podcast apps. You can also follow us on Twitter at just_roll.
All right.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick.
Chapter 38. An Old Acquaintance. And our symbol is the snake in the wheel. With the crowds, it took Nynaeve some little time to catch up, muttering every time she was jostled by a man gaping at everything in sight, or a woman dragging a child with either hand. Children usually trying to drag her to two different locations at once. The one-eyed man barely paused to look at anything except the big snake and the lions, until he reached the boar horses. He had to have seen them earlier, situated as they were, near the patron's entrance. Every time the Ch38 stood on their hind legs, as they were doing now, the great tusked heads of the adults could be seen by those outside the canvas fence, and the press to enter intensified a little more. Beneath a wide red sign that said Valen Luca in ornate gold script on both sides, two of the horse handlers collected admission from people funneled between two thick ropes, taking the money in clear, blown glass pitchers, both thick and flawed. Luca would never lay out coin for better, so they could see that the coins were right without touching them. They dumped the money straight from the pitchers through a hole in the top of an iron-strapped box, so wrapped about with chain that Petra had to have put it in place before the first silver penny went in. Another pair of horse handlers, thick-shouldered, broken-nosed men with sunken knuckles of brawlers, stood nearby with cudgels to make sure that the crowd remained orderly, and to keep an eye on the men taking the money, Nynaeve suspected. Luca was not a trusting man, especially when it came to coin. In fact, he was as tight as the skin on an apple. She had never met anyone so stingy. Slowly, she elbowed close to the man with the gray-streaked topknot. He had no trouble reaching the front rank before the Ch38, of course. His scar and painted eye patch would have seen to that, even without the sword on his back. At the moment, he was watching the big gray animals with a grin and what she supposed was wonder on that stony face. Uno? She thought that was the right name. His head turned to stare at her. Once, she had the shawl back in place. He raised to stare at her face, but no recognition lit in his dark eye. The other, the painted red glaring one, made her a little queasy. Sarandon waved her goad, shouting something slurred beyond intelligibility, and the Ch38 turned, Sonnet, the cow, placing her feet on Myr's broad, rounded back while he remained upright. Nerin, the calf, put her feet low on Sonnet's back. "I saw you in Feldara," Nynaeve said, and again, on Toman Head, briefly. "After Falma, you were with—" She did not know how much she could say, with people cheek by jowl around her. Rumors of the Dragon Reborn had circulated all through Amadisha, and some even had his name right. With Rand. Uno's real eye narrowed. She tried not to see the other, and after a moment, he nodded. "I remember the face. I never forget a flaming pretty face, but the hair was bloody well different. Nina?" "Nynaeve," she told him sharply. He shook his head, eyeing her up and down, and before she could say another word, he had seized her arm and was all but dragging her through the entrance. The horse handlers there recognized her, of course, and the broken-nosed fellows started forward, hefting their cudgels. She waved them away furiously, even as she was yanking her arm free. It took 3 tries, and still, it was more a matter of his letting go. The man had a grip like iron. The men with the clubs hesitated, then drifted back to their places when they saw Uno drop his grip. Apparently, they knew what Valen Luca would prefer them to be guarding.
His money.
I just looked up from the book and saw Radius wrote pot calling the kettle black. Was that about Luca being stingy?
Yeah, totally. That was Nynaeve calling Luca stingy. Absolutely. So hypocritical, because she's constantly pinching the pennies. And complaining whenever Elaine gives anyone, she's like, oh, that woman constantly gonna reach into her purse and thinks gold's always gonna be there. It's like, Nynaeve's number one concern is, like, being cheap and pinching pennies, and here she accuses Luca of being cheap.
She always does that kind of thing.
There's actually these two chapters have a lot of Nynaeve hypocriticalness in them. There's a lot of like, oh man, stop being so violent or I'll beat it out of you type stuff.
I did really like the line, tight as the skin on an apple. Perfect.
And just in case you haven't figured it out, Uno's name means one, and he's a one-eyed guy. I don't know. It took me. Some people. I knew it should be an obvious connection, but I think sometimes we miss the most obvious of connections. That Uno is the one-eyed man.
Wow, I did not miss that. Although Uno doesn't mean anything in the Wheel of Time universe, I suppose.
Right. Yeah, we debated about that, I think, in one of our previous episodes, as to whether or not he got the name Uno before or after he lost the eye. Seems like it's his birth name, because I think what we decided is Uno doesn't mean one in Ranland, and that's why, like, it's just a little Jordan joke.
Yeah, I think so. There's a little bit of information here about Samara and what's going on around it. Basically that, like, certain menageries are kept a certain distance from the city and things like that. I don't think it's too important or interesting.
Half a mile doesn't seem like that safe of a distance. Like, I feel like the animals could charge across half a mile instantly, but I guess it does at least create some separation. Why are there so many people coming together in this one spot? Are they all coming to see the prophet? Is that what has brought the crowds to this place?
Aren't there also like 10 different menageries or something?
There are, but I thought the menageries were coming because the people were there, not the other way around.
Well, there's a city.
True. And the queen is there, Queen Alejandra, technically. But Gillidan is in so much disarray. I mean, the country itself is just a disaster zone. So it doesn't seem like that it's going to attract all these crowds of people unless something else is going on. And so that's why I think the prophet has to be bringing in the people.
At least in part, for sure. Uno refused to answer her questions, or say a word, or do more than give her dire frowns, until they were out of the jam of people, and onto a cart path of hard-packed dirt. What I am flaming trying to do, he growled then, is to take you where we can flaming well talk without you being torn to flaming bits by flaming folk trying to kiss your flaming hem when they find out you flaming know the Lord Dragon. There was no one within 30 paces of them, but he still stared around for anyone who might hear.
I highlighted this whole paragraph as something I wanted you to read.
Blood and bloody ashes, woman. Don't you know what these flaming goat herds are like? Half of them think the Creator talks to him over bloody supper every night, and the other half think he is the bloody Creator. I will thank you to moderate your language, Master Uno, and I will thank you to slow down too. We are not running a foot race. Where are you going, and why should I stir another step with you? He rolled his eye toward her, chuckling wryly. Oh, I do remember you. The one with the mouth.
Yes, she does. Oh, I do like Bambi's suggestion. Do you want to reread that and just replace flaming with fucking in every instance?
I will if you guys want me to. Oh, shit. All right. There's a lot of support for this. Okay.
All right. If you don't want to hear the modern curse words, skip ahead 30 seconds.
This is pretty hilarious. Okay. Straight face. What I am fucking trying to do, he growled then, is to take you where we can fucking talk about you being torn to fucking bits by fucking folk trying to kiss your fucking hem when they find out you fucking know the Lord Dragon. There was no one within 30 paces of them.
All right, I'll do the next bit. God damn it, woman. Don't you know that these fucking goat heads are what these fucking goat heads are like? Half of them think the Creator talks to them over bloody supper. Over fucking summer every night, and the other half think he is the fucking Creator. I can't not do it. That's hard. You can read what's on the page. And so he immediately tries to rescue her, references that blue woman, which is Moraine, and other than him being kind of startled that that woman with a face like a bloody queen was Elaine. I always loved that one.
I can scrape, he says, this is no place for you to be. I can scrape together enough enough coin to get you to Tyr, I think. Rumor says that's where the Lord Dragon is. Again, he looked around warily. Unless you want to go to the island instead.
Tarvalin.
Gotta say, yeah, for Uno, he's doing a pretty good job at speaking discreetly. He says, are you still with the blue woman, or is it the brown woman that you're with? So when they were all together last, Varen was there as well.
No, he's clever, likes to curse, but I enjoy Uno. Uno's a fun character. He sort of gives the Borderlands a lot of character. Sort of the opposite of Lan, of like, yeah, of course you're going to have like Lan, this noble Borderlander with this, incredible history and fate and nobility, and then you have Uno, who's like this just fucking brawler with a sword who just wants to, but he's still an honorable dude, but he's not like a noble dude. He's very crass, and I like the contrast between Lan and Uno as the sort of giving you the range of Borderlanders.
Yeah, he's a soldier.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, he's a soldier, not necessarily a warrior in the same way that Lan is.
Nynaeve informs Uno that the other girl in the menagerie is Elaine, and Uno slowly realizes it. Although the hair seems to have been a pretty good disguise, and being in the menagerie, I'm sure. Right.
I mean, that's decent disguise if she's able to hide in plain sight from someone who does know her and thinks she looks like a queen, but doesn't make the connection.
Yeah.
It's like the Clark Kent disguise. You put some glasses on him. It's amazing how glasses and a change of context makes you just see someone in a totally different way. When I was a kid, I always thought the Clark Kent glasses disguise was ridiculous. But as I get older and realize just how blind people are, I'm like, oh, yeah, no, context makes all the difference.
And next, Nynaeve basically says, what are you doing here, Uno? And Uno says, the blue woman gave us a name in Gehenna and said we were to wait there until she sent instructions. But the woman in Gehenna was dead and buried when we arrived. An old woman, died in her sleep, and none of her relatives had ever heard the blue woman's name. Then Masema started talking to people, and, well, there was no point in staying there for orders we'd never hear if they did come. We stay this close to Masema because he slips us enough to live on, though none except for Bartu and Nengar listen to his trash. The grizzled topknot swung as he shook his head in irritation, and then Suddenly, Nynaeve realized there had not been a single obscene word in that. He looked about to swallow his tongue. Perhaps if you cursed only occasionally, she sighed, maybe once every other sentence. And then he does.
Exactly, every other sentence. And I was speculating, I think before we started, that this was maybe an argument between Harriet and Robert Jordan about how often Uno should curse, and Harriet was like, can you tone it down to like every other sentence? And he was like, fine, I'll do it, but I'll make it a point in my book. Going back to his story, though, whenever someone dies in their sleep in the Wheel of Time, you have to be very, very cautious about what killed them. Because people dream and go to Teleron Riyadh or get pulled into Teleron Riyadh and die in their sleep. Now, she was an old woman, but I think Masema, the prophet, is manipulated almost from the beginning. I think a Forsaken kills the old woman, knows where they're headed. Maybe the Black Ajah somehow found out about it, passed it up. And as we know at the end of the book, Masema's being visited by a glowing figure that he thinks is the Dragon Reborn in his dreams. And I think that starts way back here when he started doing his preaching.
I think Masema is being manipulated somehow. He just doesn't seem right. And the fact that none of his fellow soldiers have taken on his level of
fanaticism.
Yeah, fanaticism is the word.
And certainly he was a bit of a fanatic beforehand, but there's something else going on with Masema, and I think it's compulsion. It's been a long time, right? We get this backstory, and it's like, we haven't seen these folks since we left the mountains at the beginning of the Dragon Reborn.
Right.
Right, so it's been all the Dragon Reborn, all of the Shadow Rising, and now we're well into Fires of Heaven. And that's like a full year of time. And they've been sort of traveling. There's lots of time for the Forsaken to track down Masema, figure out that he was going to be a thing, and possibly just know where they were heading. So my only debate is whether or not do you think they were waiting and killed the woman? Or do you think he gathered a following first, and that attracted the attention of the Forsaken, which they then rerouted into the destructive behavior?
It's hard to say without any information to go on, but it does all seem very suspicious. Something obviously happened, but we don't know what.
Do we know who is the one who visits him at the end and creates the image of the shiny Dragon Reborn? We know it's a female Forsaken, but I don't know any more detail. Whether I think it's Mogedion.
Ooh, what was this? An image of the shiny dragon?
Yeah, so in the end of, I want to say book 13 or so, when Fael visits him, basically he says, no, I've been doing everything the Dragon Reborn has been telling me to do, and we see from his POV, he actually gets visited in his dreams by a figure that is basically surrounded by glowing light and looks like the Dragon Reborn. It's like some people think it's Demandrid, some people thought it was... Yeah, it's a really quick scene where basically you see that Masana has been taking orders from someone who he thinks is the Dragon Reborn in his dreams.
Gotcha.
So I don't even know if he was ever really under compulsion so much as he was just being manipulated and visited by, quote-unquote, the Dragon Reborn in his dreams.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention that a couple of people in the Discord were suggesting that maybe Masema just broke. And I want to give that some credence as well, that, you know, this guy who grows up in a warrior society that's all about the light fighting the shadow, and then, like, you know, Armageddon is here. It's here. I feel like a lot of people in our world would break if there was some obvious proof that Armageddon was happening, like the four horsemen come riding out of the sea or whatever, like in Revelations. People would freak out, you know?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I think there's something to that too, and it would at least make him much easier to manipulate. Man, I mean, if I saw that giant seven-headed sea monster or whatever, I'd freak out. I'm not even really religious. Holy shit, were we wrong?
Oof, yeah, that would be weird. And by the way, the quote we have from Sanderson is, Masema was not manipulated from the start, but once he was noticed as a potentially useful tool.
That makes sense to me.
So the question is, at what point did he become a useful tool? Was it very early on, or was it much later?
I feel like you see the darkness in him in the next chapter. Mm-hmm. He doesn't seem real, almost. Aradia says, at least probably not before Falma.
No, I don't think before Falma, for sure.
That.
Yeah. But at this point, I think he's definitely under some sort of compulsion manipulation.
I would suspect sometime around when they arrive at Gehenna.
Well, yeah, I think it's when she says here, then Masema started talking to people. And that's, I think, here's the question. I think it may be a Varen situation, where Varen basically knew where they were going and set them up. She's the only one who would know where they were going. And, of course, she's still loyal to the Black. She's still reporting back. She kind of has to do some of those stuff, so she may have reported back that, at very least, reported where they were going, yeah.
It could be. And there would only be a handful of people who knew the name of the woman they were supposed to meet, who mysteriously dies right before they get there.
Yep.
Varen would be one of them. Then Moraine and the Shinarans, who I'd trust with anything of that group. Moraine and the Shinarans. Varen? Who knows? Maybe she passed the word.
I often wonder, because, like, Varen's in the middle of this stuff, and she is Black, and she's not able to betray the Black until the last hour of her death, which means before then she has to be doing what she's ordered.
Right.
And probably feeding some information back just to give herself some cover. And some simple cover about, like, this is where the Shinaran's going could be what covered for. I don't know.
You know, sometimes I think about when Varen gives the ring, the stone ring to Rangreal, to Egwene.
It's one of the few times we see her motivations, yeah.
and explains the danger, but gives her the tool. And Varen shows her that she has a scar. Varen shows Egwene that she has a scar from entering Teleran Riyadh.
Mm-hmm.
Varen knows how to and has entered Teleran Riyadh.
And has a bunch of papers written by Corian and Nadil about Teleran Riyadh.
Right, what's she studying all that for? Why she have that Terangrial?
Well, she doesn't give it to Egwene. She says it was violating her orders enough to give her the Terangrial. She could at least justify it.
Withhold the explanation, the papers.
Yeah, and basically say, like, hey, I'm giving her this tool, but it's a dangerous tool, so maybe she'll cut herself. And that's how I'm serving the Black Oddjaw.
Yeah, right. And, well, I mean, the point that I was trying to make is that Varen has entered Teleran Riyadh and knows what she's doing, which doesn't say that Varen murdered the agent in Gehenna, but she could have in her sleep. Oh, I was kind of giving my evidence for openly speculating that Varen could be in Teleran Riyadh doing things, or receiving messages from Teleran Riyadh, or passing them through, or murdering people while they sleep.
Oh, that's a good point. I honestly don't think she ever went in more than once. I think she went in, got cut, and got out, and was like, ooh, that's a bad idea. I'm going to put this away.
Oh, yeah. I can't prove it at all. I'm just saying she could have.
She could have. Yeah, that's a good point.
She shows that she has and knows how. I like the idea of Varen being involved. It's compelling.
At the very least, reporting where the Borderlanders were going so that they could be set up.
Yeah, or an assassin could be sent. She could have just passed the word.
Because she passed it up the Dark Friend chain that can get to the Forsaken pretty easily, and they can be like, here's a useful tool. Let the Lord of Chaos rule. Let's see if we can manipulate him into creating chaos. And even if they were anti-Rand, it seems like a good idea to create this like rabble of people who are gonna create problems for him.
Yeah, it's just chaotic
and make people less likely to make them less likely to be supported.
These are all people who could be farming or hauling water or making weapons or whatever for the last battle, and instead they're wandering around kind of worshipping this prophet guy.
Who's very much a false prophet and giving people weird moral codes to abide by.
Yeah. Other than the readout, the only other thing that I had to add to this chapter is that while talking to Uno, Nynaeve realizes that this dreaded prophet, Masema, is a really powerful man in this area, and if anyone could get her a boat to Tyr, or wherever she wants to go, it's him. And she knows him.
So yeah, she's like, all right, go ahead and take me to him. Let's see if I can get this thing arranged and get the boat. Because she is desperately trying to get out of here before she gets more arrows fired at her. She is terrified of that. And a lot of her recklessness over this chapter and the next chapter is entirely because she doesn't want to be shot at with arrows anymore.
I like it.
Because she's very reckless. Her like sending both Masema and the White Cloaks at the same thing, all of that's like entirely based around her personal desire to not be shot at with arrows, and the fact that she's actually terrified of being shot at.
Well, she's got a decent strategy.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to be shot at either.
So Uno starts taking Nynaeve to Masema, the prophet. Just don't remind him that you have anything to do with that bloody island, Uno went on, eyeing her thoughtfully. Now that she thought of it, she realized that he very likely did not know what her connection to Tar Valon actually was. Women did go there without becoming Aes Sedai, after all, to seek help or answers. He was aware that she was involved in some way, but no more than that. He isn't much friendlier to women from there than the White Cloaks are. If you just keep your mouth bloody well shut about it, he'll likely pass it over. For somebody who comes from the same village as the Lord Dragon, Masema will probably have a flaming boat built. The crowds were thicker at the city gates, flanked by squat gray towers, men and women streaming in and out, afoot and mounted, in every sort of garb from rags to embroidered silk coats and dresses. The gates themselves, thick and iron-bound, stood open under the guard of a dozen spearmen in scaled tunics and round steel caps with flat rims. Actually, the guards paid more attention to half their number of White Cloaks lounging nearby than to anything else. It was the men in snowy cloaks and burnished mail who watched the flow of people. "Do the White Cloaks cause much trouble?" she asked quietly. Uno pursed his lips as if to spit, glanced at her, and did not. Where do they bloody not? There was a woman with one of these traveling shows who did tricks, sleight of hand. 4 days ago, a flaming mob of pigeon-gutted sheepheads tore the show apart. Val and Luca had certainly never mentioned that. Peace. What they wanted was the woman. Claimed she was... He glowered at the folk hurrying by and lowered his voice. Aes Sedai. And a dark friend. Broke her bloody neck getting her to a rope, so I hear. But they hung her corpse anyway. Masema had the ringleaders beheaded, but it was White Cloaks whipped up the bloody mob. His scowl matched the red painted on his patch. There's been too many flaming hangings and beheadings, if you bloody well ask me. Bloody Masema's as bad as the bloody White Cloaks when it comes to finding a dark friend under every flaming rock. Once every other sentence, she murmured, and the man actually blushed. Don't know what I'm thinking, he grumped, coming to a stop. Can't take you in there. It's half festival and half riot, with a cut purse every third step and a woman not safe out of doors after dark. He sounded more scandalized about the last than the rest. In Shinar, a woman was safe anywhere, any time, except from Trollocs and Myrddraal, of course, and any man would die to see it so. Not safe. I'll take you back. When I find a way, I'll come for you. That settled it for her. Pulling her arm loose before he could get a grip on it, she quickened her pace toward the gates. Come along, Uno, and do not dawdle. If you dawdle, I will leave you behind. He caught up to her, grumbling under his breath about the stubbornness of women. Once she understood that was his subject, and that apparently he did not think her injunction against cursing held when talking to himself, she stopped listening. I like Uno. I like the Shinarans.
Oh yeah, Uno's great.
All of them, really.
Even Masema?
I bet he was a great soldier before something happened to his head.
Fair enough. I mean, he always kind of well, I was going to say irrationally hated Rand. He hated Rand for a good reason. Rand looked like an Aiel.
Fair enough.
And he did hate Aiel for somewhat good reasons. That's,
I think most people in our generation can think of one from the previous generation who was just mindlessly angry at Asian people because of, Vietnam, Korea. I'm not saying it's a reason.
Are you talking about Trump in particular, or just all boomers?
Just a lot of them. A lot of them came home and, just never really got over it, which kind of, hard to say get over it.
I mean, my grandfather never got over World War II. He always was extremely anti-Japanese.
Yeah.
People, he just hated them. And I was like, he's like, well, his brother was decapitated in a Japanese prison, and it's kind of hard to be like, yeah, don't hate them.
Yeah, right? You can't really say, get over it, man. Like, that's not really a get over it thing. Yeah.
It's not really a thing, Like, even though it is, well, he's under it now, so it's not really a big deal.
That's the way that goes.
All right. But it is, it's amazing what war does to people. When you're forced into a do-or-die situation, you have to devalue the humanity of your opponent, and that can stick with you your entire life.
I'm glad we're a bunch of softies who don't have to go fight in some foreign war for reasons we don't understand. I don't know how well my generation would do in that environment, or if they would do anything.
It would be a very different generation if we'd been...
Certainly not marching toward that machine gun, buddy. I'm walking back in history with that comment, but...
Let me just say, at this point, I think I'm too old to ever be drafted. But if I were to, the draft were to come up at any point during the time when I could have been, I was always using Canada as an alt. I would definitely have fled to Canada. I'm Canadian. I can go. Like, that's just, I get to be Canadian. It's not, I'm not living illegally in Canada. I just get to go be Canadian. Well, and just the way modern warfare is, it doesn't make sense to have draft. It takes too long to train people. And equipment is more expensive. It's
the
like
draft won't be necessary.
The person's the cheapest part of a soldier these days. Yeah.
Yeah, you just take your gamers and move them to a military base and let them pilot drones. A bunch of kids would probably be great at that. I mean, we've been training for a long time. Flying stuff on computers.
I want to say that people use Xbox controllers to control they actually adapted Xbox controllers for drone pilots.
I read an article about that a while back. Some military base in Kansas or something, there's a bunch of guys sitting in a deep fortified basement piloting drones. And or wherever else, I'm sure lots of places, but
I've been watching Gargoyles, the animated series on Disney Plus. Curious if you ever got into that.
I mean, I remember watching it as a kid. Julia and I have, talked about the show, and we watched a couple episodes on YouTube or something like that, but...
Mostly because the voice actors, are almost the next generation characters. Like, almost everybody in that show is voiced by a TNG actor.
Oh, yeah, I think I've heard that before.
There's a character named Macbeth that's voiced by Patrick Stewart. The main bad guy is Jonathan Frakes or whatever, the Riker. Even looks like him.
Ah.
Frakes. Thank you. So it's totally looks like Riker, sort of with a beard and stuff, just as the bad guy. The evil gargoyle female is voiced by Troy. Yeah, it's just all the characters in Gargoyles, except for a couple, are voiced by the next generation characters. They and it's very Shakespeare based, which is very, obviously the next generation has a lot of Shakespeare references into it, especially with Patrick Stewart being a Shakespearean actor.
Yeah.
So
there's
cool. Just a lot of parallels. And it's just a well done show. So, if you're a fan of the next generation, it's kind of not, it's awesome to hear these characters talking and interacting and hear their voices just in this slightly other sort of situation. And if you close your eyes, you can sort of imagine all these characters talking to, Worf comes in a couple of times,
That's weird that they were all together. Was it, on purpose? I mean, well, that's cool. And you guys know me. The Next Generation is, what I watch when I'm trying to go to sleep. I watch Next Gen almost every day, probably, an episode or something. Not necessarily paying attention at this point, but I don't need to. I know what's happening. It's just bedtime stories. And in the end, Jean-Luc Picard fixes everything, and everything is better.
Mm-hmm.
The end. It's very soothing.
So, Star Trek is notable among fans of Gargoyles for the large number of Star Trek cast members that voice characters on the show. At first, this was unintentional. Martha Styris and later Jonathan Frakes were both cast in prominent roles, and soon the crew began to think of Star Trek actors when casting new roles. For example, Brent Spinner was considered for the role of Anton Saris before that went to Tim Curry. Spinner was eventually cast as Puck. The following Gargoyles cast members had previously appeared in Star Trek television series or films. There's a list of, I don't want to read it because we've been reading names all night, but maybe 20 names here.
Pretty cool.
Data, Worf, Uhura, Riker, voice of young Spock, Troy, Janeway, LaForge, Sisko, Admiral Nakamura. Big names in Star Trek are on this cartoon. So, and it's a good cartoon. And it's on Disney Plus. So if you have Disney Plus, go watch it. And also, best freaking opening, one of the better freaking opening music.
Superstition in the sword ruled. It was a time of darkness. It was a world of fear. It was the age of gargoyles. Stone by day, warriors by night. We were betrayed by the humans we had sworn to protect.
It was a time of darkness.
Magic spell for 1,000 years.
Oh, pretty epic music.
Totally.
And totally sweet early 90s animation styles.
Oh, yeah. It's like He-Man, Superman, Gargoyles.
Yes, in that line.
Yeah.
We are defenders of the night. We are gargoyles.
And I mean, who didn't want to be a gargoyle, with wings and shit? I definitely. Turning to stone during the day so you didn't have to fucking deal with people.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or
support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?